What I am about to put into words began in the early autumn of 2009, buried deep in that old Appalachian spine, where the ridgelines fold into each other like layers of bruised steel, and silence carries farther than any radio ever could. 6 of us were sent on what the paperwork called a simple visibility sweep, a 5-day presence mission meant to reassure the Forest Service that we still had boots on the ground after locals complained about trespassers creeping through restricted corners of Blue Hollow. On paper, it was nothing. Routine, forgettable, the sort of assignment nobody bothers remembering after chow. But before the first night settled over the treetops, before we even finished unloading our rucks, something in that valley made the air feel wrong, as if the place itself was leaning close to study us. It was not rot or animal musk or even humidity. It was a sharper, older kind of scent, like wet stone mixed with bark that had been steeping in shadow for centuries. I felt it prickle down my arms before I knew why. Lieutenant Mason brushed it off as nothing more than altitude and nerves, but even then, there was a tightness in his jaw that said he felt it too, and simply did not want to acknowledge it. We reached the ranger outpost near mid-morning, and the station chief, a gaunt man named Harlan, whose hands looked carved from rope and timber, said almost nothing as he handed over marked maps. His finger hovered over a cluster of red circles drawn along a ridge roughly 8 miles in, his voice low as though someone were listening from inside the walls. "That's where patrols stopped returning," he told us, his eyes flicking toward the woods as if the trees themselves might disapprove. He mentioned Miller's team, how their gear kept getting rearranged at night, how they woke to find their packs opened and sorted with inhuman precision, how the woods grew so silent that even the insects refused to speak. He did not tell us to turn back, but his silence afterward did. We pushed in anyway. The old logging road carried our trucks about as far as its rutted spine would allow before it crumbled into overgrowth, forcing us to continue on foot. Laurel thickets clung to our uniforms like wet hands. In every few hundred yards we passed survey markers hammered into trunks, some correct. Others twisted or shifted as though someone had plucked them out and rearranged them without understanding their purpose. Turner, our tracker, spotted the first one. The nail holes were fresh, the bark still pale beneath the disturbed wood. He knelt, turning the marker slightly with his gloved fingers, his voice quiet as he muttered that somebody had tampered with it not long before we arrived. Mason logged the coordinates, told us to keep moving. By late afternoon, we reached the clearing Holland circled, a narrow shelf of flat ground hemmed in by 3 ridges, sheltered but claustrophobic, as though the forest had created that space intentionally and was waiting for us to step into it. Boot prints from previous teams still scarred the mud, but woven between them were other shapes, small impressions barely half the length of my palm, too neat, too symmetrical, too deliberate to be animal. Reed crouched over one, confused, guessing it might have been a child's boot, but Dalton shut that down with a slow shake of his head. No kid wanders this deep, no kid leaves tracks like that. We set up camp anyway, 3 tents in a triangle, chem lights marking the perimeter, supply crates aligned tight against Mason's shelter. Cole climbed a nearby hemlock to string the radio antenna, fighting to pull a clear signal out of the static chewing through every channel. Mason briefed us while the fire cracked low, his voice steady though the unease had sunk into all of us like cold water. He ordered rotating watch schedules, mandatory inventory checks, and immediate reporting of anything that felt off. He did not need to tell us what off meant. We felt it pressing against our skin. The first night should have been uneventful, and in a way it was. No movements, no voices, no rustling in the brush. But the quiet itself felt engineered, as if something in those woods had pressed a hand down over the valley to hush every natural sound. When Turner and I took second watch, the forest looked like a painting held beneath murky glass, frozen and listening. Around 300 hours, Turner tapped my shoulder and pointed toward the supply crates. Through night vision, I saw it. The boxes had shifted. Not far, maybe a foot to the left, but they had been placed with care, the spacing between them evenly measured, and yet nothing, no footprints, no drag marks, no broken ken lights. The locks remained sealed. The crates had been moved by something that left no trace. At dawn we reported it. Mason inspected every inch of the area, his expression unreadable. before jotting a note and telling the team to stay sharp. But Dalton's gaze never left the tree line. His eyes narrowed as if he already knew what was out there and wished he didn't. That was the first sign. Small, almost ignorable, the kind of detail you might laugh off in daylight. But Blue Hollow was testing us, even then, long before we understood we had trespassed into someone else's territory, long before we realized that the forest was not empty, but waiting, and that its watchers had been studying us since the moment our boots touched the ground. By the time the sun pushed through the canopy the next morning, Turner was already crouched beside the crates, shaking his head at the lack of tracks, as if the forest itself had erased them. He looked at me with that tight expression he wore in Afghanistan whenever something didn't line up, and he whispered that we were not alone out here. Mason inspected the crates again, his jaw set, his eyes scanning every inch of soil like he could force the truth to show itself. Nothing. No disturbed earth, no bent grass, no broken twigs, just the crates sitting neatly in a new formation, as if someone with careful hands had slid them while we slept. He wrote it down in that green notebook of his, the one he kept tucked in his cargo pocket, but I saw the way Dalton stood at the tree line with his rifle held low, his posture stiff, his gaze tracking the woods like he expected them to move. That tension followed us through the second day as we split into patrol pairs. Turner and I were assigned the eastern ridge while Mason and Cole worked the lower trails, leaving Reed at camp under Dalton's supervision. The air felt heavier with each step, thick with an awareness we couldn't shake. Turner moved quietly, pausing often to study the ground or listen to the shifting breeze. He didn't speak until nearly midday, when he suddenly froze, raising a closed fist. I stepped beside him, following his gaze to a patch of mud near a fallen log. And there they were. Prints. Bare prints. Small prints. Not the blunt, round shapes of raccoon or fox. Not the narrow deer step impressions. These were feet. Human-shaped but impossibly small, with 5 slender toes pressed cleanly into the mud. The stride was tight, the spacing deliberate, almost cautious, like a child walking with purpose. But no child could survive out here. Turner traced the edge of the nearest print with the tip of his knife, murmuring that they were fresh, only a few hours old. He looked at me with that searching expression, waiting for me to tell him he was wrong, but I had no such comfort to offer. We followed the trail for roughly 100 yards, until the ground hardened into slate and the tracks vanished as though the earth no longer wished to cooperate. Turner marked the coordinates on his GPS, his hands steady but his breathing shallow. When we radioed Mason, he told us to get back to camp immediately. Something in his voice told me he already expected the worst. When we reached the clearing, Reed stood near the tents, white as chalk. Dalton was beside him, arms crossed, scanning the brush. Reed told us he'd heard something crawling through the northern side of camp, fast, low, deliberate. He called out twice and spotted. No one had any intention of the initial test, was already fought out each time. He said, "Do you want to wait for me to do what this man does now?" I had my dull face with the devil, but I wanted to. By the time Dalton finished checking the antenna and returned, they swept the area together and found nothing but a small cairn of smooth stones, stacked carefully just outside the chem-light line. Stones that did not belong to this ridge, rounded and river-worn despite no stream running within miles. Dalton stared at them a long time before muttering that someone wanted us to notice. That night, the woods finally spoke. We were gathered around the fire, oiling rifles and stripping carbon from bolts, when the radio hissed alive. Not static, not command, laughter. Quiet, distant, warbled like it was being played through water. Childlike yet wrong, stretched at the edges. Cole froze, adjusting the squelch, switching channels, checking the batteries. But the laughter followed, every channel, every frequency. No matter where he tuned, it seeped into the signal like it lived inside the waves themselves. Reed shot to his feet, demanding to know what the hell that was, and Mason tried to keep him calm, though I saw his hand tighten around the grip of his rifle. The laughter faded, but the forest stayed too quiet, holding its breath. Then Dalton walked to the perimeter, staring into the black between the trunks. Without turning, he said they were testing us, seeing how we'd react. Mason asked who they were, and for the first time I saw fear, not panic, but reverence, cross Dalton's features. He spoke in a low voice, telling us about the Yungwe Sunsdi, the little people the Cherokee believed watched over deep hollows, not killers, judges, guardians. Beings who warned before they punished, who pushed intruders away without shedding blood, unless they were forced to. Reed let out a shaky laugh, asking if Dalton really believed in fairy tales. Dalton turned, his eyes hardened. He said he believed in what the old tribes knew, that these mountains held things older than the maps that marked them. The fire popped, the radio hissed again. And from the dark, I swear I heard faint steps, small and quick, circling us just beyond the firelight. Morning did not bring relief, it brought the boots. Every pair we owned, 6 sets, removed from our tents while we slept, and arranged in a perfect line along the fire pit. Laces tied identically, soles facing east. The spacing precise enough that Turner measured it with his hand, muttering that each was set exactly the same distance apart. Reed whispered that he had locked his tent flap, that no one could have gotten inside without waking him. Mason examined each boot, checking for cuts, tampering, anything at all, but they were untouched, simply moved. Dalton told us they'd come into our camp, walked between us while we slept, and none of us, armed, trained, alert, had heard a thing. The final blow came when we opened the ammo crates. Every single round had been sorted, lifted from its cardboard sleeve, placed in neat rows by caliber, and then by the year it was manufactured. Not one shell missing, not one out of place. Hours of work done silently, only a few feet from sleeping men with loaded rifles. Turner ran his hand over the rows of cartridges, whispering that this wasn't chaos or vandalism, this was intelligence, intention. Mason tried calling command again, but the signal was weak, fractured like something in the valley swallowed each transmission. When he finally got through, the response was hollow. I continued the mission, document everything, maintain position. As if we weren't already surrounded by something that studied us more closely than any human ever had. Reed paced, insisting we were being set up like game, waiting for the hunter. Dalton placed the steadying hand on his shoulder, telling him that if the Watchers wanted us dead, we'd never have seen sunrise. That was the moment we realized this wasn't a threat, it was a message, and the forest had only begun to speak. Dalton's words settled over us like a cold layer of frost, and for the rest of that day, none of us spoke above a murmur, as if raising our voices might provoke something listening just beyond the tree line. We spent the morning reinforcing the perimeter with tripwires, noisemakers fashioned from gutted MRE spoons, and extra Ken lights spaced farther out, pushing a 20-yard bubble around camp in every direction, as if distance alone could protect us. Cole rigged motion sensors into his radio system, hoping electromagnetic interference might betray whatever crept close. The bicep space coats will often find something even more fixed in the dark. Turner walked the perimeter with that quiet determination he carried from years spent tracking elk through Smoky Mountain fog, marking sight lines, calling out dead ground, identifying fallback routes in case the ridge ever turned hostile. We kept busy because work kept the fear from sinking too deep, but everywhere we turned, the evidence waited. Footprints too small to be human, perfectly stacked cairns of smooth river stone, in a forest miles from any source of running water. Symbols carved into trees with fresh sap still bleeding from the marks. That afternoon, while Mason and Cole climbed the ridge to adjust the antenna yet again, Turner suggested we walk the creek bed south to clear our heads. The water was cold enough to numb my ankles through my boots, flowing clear over ancient slabs of slate polished by centuries of seasons. It felt like stepping into a world older than language. After half a mile, we froze at the site carved into the massive trunk of an oak that had probably stood before the Civil War ever scarred these mountains. 3 concentric circles with radiating lines cut deeply into its surface, the bark around each groove still wet and pale, as though the blade had been drawn through it only hours before. Beneath it lay a second symbol, a 6-fingered hand, crude yet unmistakably deliberate. Turner lifted his phone, snapping photos, while whispering that these were Cherokee warning markers, the old kind predating colonization. Circles meant boundary. The hand meant watchers, guardians. Trespassers would not be harmed if they obeyed the warning. We followed the creek farther, and with each bend the symbols multiplied, scratched into flat stones, painted in mud high on boulders. cut into stumps arranged in unnatural rows, all telling the same story. Turn back, leave, do not continue. When Turner finally crouched and motioned me over, I felt the hair along my arms rise. Dozens of small footprints covered the muddy bank, narrow, delicate, five-toed like before, but more numerous, layered atop one another in swirling patterns, as though a crowd had gathered there sometime that morning. Beside them were handprints, 4 fingers, no thumb, each press identical in shape and size. No animal in these mountains left prints like that. Turner's face was pale when he finally stood. "We need to get back," he said, and there was no room for argument. We moved fast up the ridge trail, the shadows already stretching long across the hollow as the sun dipped behind the western peaks. Every branch snap in the brush made my pulse throb. Every flicker of movement at the edge of my vision sent adrenaline burning through my veins. By the time camp came into view, the sky was bruised purple and trembling with the first breath of night. Mason listened to our report with his jaw tightened into a hard line, writing notes slowly into his book before turning toward Dalton with that unspoken request for interpretation. Dalton sat cross-legged by the fire, running an oily rag down the length of his rifle with a methodical calm that somehow made the fear worse. "These are warnings," he said. "All of it. They're telling us we've crossed into ground that isn't ours, and they want us gone before they have to escalate." When Mason asked how they would escalate, Dalton only shook his head. "You do not want to find out. We would reassess at dawn," he said. "If command wouldn't approve extraction, we would move to the fallback point on the southern ridge and push out from there." Nobody argued. That night the air felt heavier than ever, thick with silence that pressed against our ears. We took shifts around the fire, watching the forest with the jittery focus of men who knew something was coming. It happened around midnight. Reed whispered that he heard tapping. At first I dismissed it as his nerves getting the best of him. But then it came again, faint, rhythmic knocks echoing through the hollow, like someone lightly drumming knuckles on wood. The sound came not from one direction but from all sides at once, bouncing between trees as though the forest itself tapped back. Turner raised his night vision, scanning the tree line until a quiet curse slipped from his lips. Movement. Multiple shapes, low profile, moving laterally with inhuman speed. Mason moved beside him asking for a count, but Turner could only shake his head. Small, really small, 2 feet tall at most. Then Cole's radio crackled alive, carrying the same distorted laughter we had heard the night before, but louder now, clearer, almost gleeful. Reed lifted his rifle, voice trembling as he asked whether we should engage. Mason shut it down immediately. "Hold fire, do not shoot unless fired upon." The tapping built into a rapid surrounding chorus. Through the green tint of night vision, faint silhouettes darted through the trees, appearing between trunks only long enough to vanish in a blur. They were coordinated, too coordinated, moving in sync like a trained team sweeping the perimeter. My grip tightened around my rifle. My breath fogged the inside of my nods. Then everything stopped at once. The radio went quiet. The tapping ceased. The shapes vanished like smoke pulled backward into the brush. Dawn came slow and gray, but with its light came the most chilling message yet. Our perimeter was destroyed. Every chem light that had marked the boundary was gone. Every one. They had been collected, carried off, and reassembled in a perfect ring around the camp twice as large as before. And at the center, drawn in precise lines of ash from our own fire pit, was the 6-fingered hand symbol. Each finger pointed directly at one of our tents. But what froze us in place was the flag. Mason's small American flag, the one he planted beside his tent on every mission, had been removed, folded with flawless military precision, and laid gently in the center of the ash hand, like an offering or a warning. We stared at it in silence, each of us realizing the same truth. They had walked among us again, silent as breath, choosing not to harm us. Not yet. This was a final message. Leave, now, before the rules changed. We stood around that ash-drawn symbol for what felt like an entire lifetime, each of us staring at the folded flag like it was a piece of evidence recovered from our own graves. And when Mason finally spoke, his voice carried none of the steadiness he usually wore like armor. He tried the radio first, calling command by the book, Call sign, location, urgency stated twice, but the only thing that answered him was a slab of dead static that pulsed in uneven waves. Like something in the hollow was breathing through the signal. He tried again, louder, sharper, but the reply never changed. Cole knelt beside the radio, swapping batteries, checking connections, extending the antenna, muttering that the system should have been working because nothing was technically wrong. Dalton walked to the edge of that ash circle, crouched, and stared down at the precise military fold of the flag. When he said they were cutting us off, Cole scoffed, reminding him that whatever was out there did not have jammers powerful enough to disrupt the military frequency. Dalton didn't look up. "They don't need equipment," he said softly. "This valley twists signals. The old people used to say the hollows eat voices carried through the air." Mason made his decision right then. "Pack everything. We're moving to higher ground. If the signal can't escape this basin, we take ourselves out of it." We tore down camp in 20 minutes, shoulders tight, hands shaking from exhaustion and nerves, each man checking his gear twice. The forest seemed to lean in as we worked, watching, waiting. The trail up the southern ridge was narrow and steep, a switchback goat path that forced us into single file. Turner on point, Mason behind him, Cole with the radio pack in the middle, me next, Reed behind me, and Dalton covering Weir. Halfway up, Turner stopped so suddenly that Mason nearly walked into him. He raised a clenched fist, halt signal, and sank into a crouch. I stepped forward beside him, following his line of sight, and my stomach tightened. There, arranged in a careful, perfect row across the trail, were dozens of small spears, each about 2 feet long, sharpened to lethal points, the shafts hardened by fire and angled identically, forming a barrier we could not cross without disturbing them. It wasn't meant to kill, it was meant to warn. Turner touched one gently with a fingertip, confirming it was solid, expertly crafted. Mason studied the barrier, then scanned the flanking terrain. The ridge was too steep to climb, and the only alternate route would push us deeper into the hollow, exactly where we did not want to go. So he made the call we feared. We go through, carefully, one at a time. We stepped between those spears like we were walking through a minefield, each foot placed with surgical precision. I was halfway across when I felt the hairs on my neck rise. There, farther upslope in a tangle of brush, stood 3 figures, small, motionless, watching. Even at that distance, their silhouettes were wrong, compressed, not quite human in proportion. They weren't hiding, they wanted to be seen. I whispered contact, 11 o'clock upslope. Mason raised an open palm, a gesture that looked more hopeful than confident. The figures did not move, did not respond in any way beyond standing perfectly still. When the last of us cleared the barrier, they simply turned and dissolved into the trees without a single sound. Reed whispered shakily if I had seen their faces. I told him no, but the truth was burned into my mind. I had seen one face for a heartbeat, human-shaped, but sharper, too narrow, and the eyes reflected light like an animal caught in the spotlight. We reached the ridge as the sun climbed higher, and finally, the signal broke through enough for Mason to get a partial transmission through the command. His report was clipped and painfully professional. Equipment tampering, psychological pressure, possible non-human contact, extraction requested within 24 hours. The response arrived in shattered fragments, but the meaning was unmistakable. Hold position, support en route, estimated arrival unknown. Dalton laughed under his breath, a humorless sound. Support on the way, he said. That could mean tonight or next month. Mason didn't bother replying. Instead, he ordered us to establish a defensive position. We picked a rocky outcrop with limited approaches and a wide view over the hollow, then started setting up watch posts, rationing what food we had left, and reinforcing every angle we could. As Cole wrestled with the radio, hoping elevation might stabilize the signal, Turner and I swept the perimeter. What we found tightened something deep inside my chest. More carvings etched into tree trunks, more cairns made of stolen river stones, more of those impossibly small footprints patterned around the edges of the ridge, like we had been circled and assessed. And then, we found something worse. Caught on the thorns of a deadfall bush was a strip of military fabric, fresh, torn, not worn by the weather, Same pattern as ours. Turner compared it to his sleeve, then mine, and shook his head. All accounted for, so whose was it? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. 100 yards farther, we found more, gear arranged with reverence. A pack leaning gently against a tree, a radio with its antenna raised toward the sky, as though waiting for a reply that never came, an M4 rifle stripped and cleaned. Each component laid out on a flat stone like a ceremonial display, and a uniform jacket folded into a perfect square, name tape visible, Sergeant Miller, the ranger who vanished 2 months earlier. The forest exhaled around us as if acknowledging our discovery. No blood, no struggle, no body. Just his belongings arranged like a message left for anyone who dared follow in his steps. This is what happens when you push past the warnings. When we returned to the outcrop, dusk was already creeping between the ridges, the hollow swallowing the remaining light. We tightened our circle, rifles ready, eyes scanning the endless sweep of dark forest. Reed asked quietly what would happen if support never arrived. No one answered him, because the truth was pulsing in every one of our chests. We would have to walk out, and whatever lived in Blue Hollow would be waiting on every trail. Night rose like a tide, cold and steep and merciless. Mason ordered a cold camp. No fire, no lights, just night vision and discipline. 2 men awake at all times, sleep in full gear, rifles within reach. The temperature plunged, our breath hanging in pale ghosts before disappearing into the dark. And beneath that cold lurked something older, something patient, something that had watched us since the moment we entered Blue Hollow, something still deciding what kind of men we were and whether we would be allowed to leave at all. The cold on that ridge felt different from any chill I had ever known in Afghanistan, Korea, or the Rockies. This was a deeper kind of cold, the kind of slid beneath your uniform and sat behind your ribs like a living thing. And as Reed rubbed his hands together for warmth while Cole cocooned himself inside his poncho liner, the truth hit all of us at once. We were underprepared, undermanned, and unwelcome. Our cold weather gear sat back in the trucks miles away, useless to us now, while the forest around us seemed to draw tighter with every passing minute. Turner muttered that the trees were leaning closer than they had an hour earlier, and though no one answered, none of us disagreed. I took first watch with Dalton, the two of us sitting back to back on the rocky ledge, while the forest disappeared beneath a sheet of darkness, so thick it felt like ink spilled over the world. The wind pushed through the canopy in long, uneven breaths that made the branches sway like something alive. I found myself counting the seconds between gusts, one slow heartbeat, then another, anything to keep my mind from drifting toward the shapes we had seen on the slope, or the stripped clean rifle laid out beneath the dead man's name. For nearly an hour, Dalton said nothing, checking his sector with slow, deliberate sweeps of his night vision, adjusting the focus every few minutes to battle eye strain. But eventually I felt the shift in his breathing. It had tightened, gone shallow, the same way it did the night we were trapped in Kunar with mortars walking toward us. He spoke without turning his head. "They're not doing this to scare us," he said quietly. "They're teaching us." I asked him what lesson they thought we needed, and he exhaled through his nose. That we're not in charge here. That we stepped onto ground with rules older than anything we follow. He said the Cherokee used to bring offerings, tobacco, beads, carved tokens, not out of fear but respect. You take from the forest, you give back. You enter certain hollows, you ask permission. Then he added, almost bitterly, "We didn't ask a damn thing." Before I could answer, something moved downslope, pale, wavering lights, dozens of them, drifting between the trunks. At first I thought they were flashlights, but they moved wrong, too soft, too fluid, like glowing insects congregating in tight, controlled formations. I tapped Dalton's shoulder. "Foxfire," he whispered. "They're using foxfire." The lights spread, curving around the ridge in a slow, deliberate arc until they formed a wide half circle. Through my night vision, I could see figures holding them, small, compact silhouettes moving with coordinated purpose, not attacking, just surrounding. Dalton keyed the radio, his voice steady but low. "All stations, multiple contacts approaching. Hold positions, do not fire." Mason and Cole scrambled toward the ledge, Reed and Turner taking the opposite flank. The lights tightened, drawing closer until the forest glowed in a strange green haze through our nods, and then they stopped. 40, maybe 50 small figures stood at the edge of our effective range, each holding a glowing clump of foxfire in one hand and a long spear or staff in the other. Up close, they looked even less human, short, muscular frames, sharp-angled faces with eyes that reflected light like polished mirrors. Their clothing looked woven from bark or hide, primitive yet crafted with purpose. They did not chatter. They did not point weapons. They simply stared. Weed's voice cracked over the radio. "Lieutenant, what do we do?" Mason didn't answer at first. He just stared at the ring of watchers, his silhouette rigid, the weight of the moment pressing against him, like the entire mountain leaned on his shoulders. Then finally he whispered, "We wait. If they wanted us dead, we'd already be gone." 10 minutes passed in silence, though it felt like 10 hours. I could hear my own pulse hammering inside my ears, feel the sweat creeping down my spine despite the cold. None of the figures moved. None blinked. They were waiting for something, some signal, some decision we had yet to make. And then it came. A single, sharp whistle from deeper in the forest, a high, piercing note that cut through the cold air like a blade. Instantly, every figure responded. They turned at the exact same moment, retreating into the trees with perfect synchronicity, lights bobbing as they melted into the darkness. Within seconds, the ridge was empty, as if they had never been there at all. Dalton lowered his rifle. "That was a warning," he murmured, "their last polite one." Reed swallowed. Or what? Dalton didn't soften it, or they stopped being polite. None of us slept another second. We rotated watch every hour, but even the men who weren't on duty stayed awake, sitting with knees pulled to their chest, glancing at every shadow that breathed wrong. The radio was useless now, only bursts of static rising and falling like something massive moved through the frequencies. Dawn arrived gray and heavy, the fog curling up the ridge in thick ropes that smothered sight and sound. Mason gave the order immediately. "We walk out, South Ridge Trail, high ground, fast pace, no stopping unless forced." Everyone nodded, no arguments, no hesitation. We packed silently, double-checking gear, holsters, straps, magazines, evidence cases, every photograph, every note, every recorded sound. Command might not believe us, but they would damn well see what we saw. The trail downward was slick with wet leaves and loose slate, every step a potential slide into unseen danger. The fog made visibility collapse to less than 20 yards. Each of us walked with our weapon high, barrel tracking every shift of the mist. A mile in, Turner stopped cold. Another spear barrier blocked the trail, larger, angrier, topped with carved bone. And behind it, standing in that milky fog like ghosts rising from the earth, were dozens of figures watching us without a single blink. The message was unmistakable. This time, we were not being warned. We were being judged. And whatever came next depended entirely on what we did in the next breath. Mason stepped forward first, the fog curling around him as if the hollow itself were testing his resolve. And when he lowered his rifle and raised his empty hands, palms open, the ridge fell into a silence so complete it felt carved into the air. This wasn't the same officer who briefed us back at Fort Campbell. This was a man who understood, finally and fully, that rank, training, and firepower meant nothing inside Blue Hollow. His voice stayed level when he spoke, slow and respectful, each word chosen with care. "We are leaving," he said. "We recognize this is your ground. We mean no disrespect." The figures didn't react, not with movement, not with sound, not even with the subtle shift you expect from a breathing body. Through my scope, I could see them more clearly than before. Sharp, angular features, dark eyes that reflected light like obsidian mirrors, small frames built from corded muscle rather than frailty. Their spears were held vertically, not pointed at us, ceremonial, not hostile. They were judging us, weighing us, deciding if we understood the rules they had been showing us since the first night. Then one stepped forward. It moved with a steady, measured grace, older than the rest, its posture speaking of authority the way Mason's did when facing command. It carried a staff wrapped with feathers, small bones, and something like woven grasses that rattled softly whenever it touched the ground. 3 times it struck the earth with the base of the staff, and the sound cracked through the hollow like thunder rolling through a stone chamber. Too loud, too deep, too unnatural to come from wood meeting dirt. The elder spoke, not English, not Cherokee, a language built from sharp clicks, rolling consonants, and rhythmic tones that seemed to vibrate through the marrow of my bones. It gestured toward us, toward the valley, toward the sky, as if illustrating a history we could not begin to comprehend. The speech lasted maybe half a minute, but it felt immeasurably older, like an echo of something spoken in these mountains long before any mapmaker gave them a name. Then the others began pounding their spear shafts against the ground in unison, slow at first, then building into a deep drumming that shook the air and made the rocks beneath my boots tremble. Reed flinched behind me. I heard the faint click of his safety coming off. I snapped a whisper into the radio. "Hold fire. Do not engage. If one of us panicked now, we would not survive 3 seconds." Dalton stepped up beside Mason, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on the elder. "Sir," he said quietly, "I think I understand some of this." Mason nodded without looking away. "Go on." Dalton swallowed before speaking. "They're saying we brought metal and fire into a place that demands respect, that we took without asking, that we crossed a boundary we didn't recognize, and they gave us warnings, but we ignored them." He paused, listening to the drumming, his expression tightening. "And I think they're reminding us of others who did the same, men who refused to listen." Miller flashed across all our minds at the same time. Mason's face shifted, something like understanding or resignation settling into his eyes. Then he did something none of us expected. He unslung his rifle, placed it gently on the ground, stepped forward, and reached into his pocket. When he pulled out his challenge coin, a simple, worn piece of metal he carried through 2 tours, he held it out with both hands like an offering. "This is all I have," he said, a sign of respect, permission to leave in peace. The elders studied him. Then it moved, slow, deliberate, gentle. It took the coin with both hands, turning it over, examining the engravings like it understood the significance embedded in the metal. Then it spoke again, short this time, final sounding. The drumming stopped instantly. The wall of spears parted. A narrow gap opened, just right enough for 6 men to pass single file. "Go now. Don't return." The message needed no translation. We moved through the opening without a word, eyes forward, rifles low, hearts hammering. I felt the elders gaze on me as I passed, heavy and ancient, not hostile but scrutinizing, like it was memorizing my face to ensure I never forgot this moment. The fog loosened as we descended the trail, and within half a mile the ridge flattened into a gentle slope. And there, just beyond the thinning mist, the ranger station appeared, 2 miles away, framed by a sliver of morning light. Reed exhaled a shaky laugh, relief breaking across his face for the first time in days. But Turner suddenly raised his fist. "Stop!" His eyes were fixed on the ground beside the trail, a cairn of stones, arranged with the same impossible precision as all the others. But this one held something new, Miller's fabric strip, and beside it, a dog tag. Mason picked it up slowly. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Sergeant Miller, the man who vanished 2 months earlier." Another 100 yards revealed the rest. Miller's pack, propped neatly against a tree. His radio, antenna extended toward the sky. His uniform jacket folded into a perfect square, name tape facing up. His weapon laid out in components, as clean as the day it left the armory. No blood, no body, no sign of violence. Just a message left for us to witness, to understand exactly what happens when a man pushes past the boundaries of Blue Hollow. Dalton opened Miller's field journal with gloved hands, flipping to the last entry. The handwriting was frantic, words scratched out and rewritten. "Day 6. They won't let us leave. Every direction leads back to camp. Jenkins wants to fight our way out. I think that's the test. Do we force our way through, or do we learn the boundary? If you're reading this, we failed. Don't make our mistake. Respect the hollow. Don't try to prove anything." The final words burned like a brand at the base of my skull. Just leave. And for the first time since stepping into Blue Hollow, we finally understood exactly what that meant, and why we were being allowed to walk out when another man had not. Miller's final words clung to us like a shadow as we continued down the trail, each step carrying the weight of a man who would walk the same path and never come back. And by the time the ranger station finally came into view, its weathered porch and tin roof cutting through the thinning trees, we were moving on instinct alone, drained, hollow-eyed, and half convinced that the forest might still reach out and pull us back before we escaped its boundary for good. Harlan sat on the porch as if he had been waiting all morning, coffee steaming in one hand, the other resting on his knee, like a man who'd seen this scene play out too many times to react with surprise. When Mason walked up the steps, dirty, shaking, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, Harlan simply nodded. "You made it out," he said softly. "Not everyone does." Mason told him where we found Miller's gear, how it had been arranged with reverence rather than violence, how we saw no sign of his body, and how something in the hollow had watched over his belongings, like artifacts from a ceremony. Harlan didn't answer immediately. He took a long sip of coffee, stared at the tree line, then said Miller pushed too far. He tried to prove something. The mountains don't like men who come here to prove things. They've been around longer than any of us, and they have their own way of deciding who stays and who leaves. When Mason asked where Miller was now, Harlan shrugged. Gone. Some say he walked deeper in trying to make peace. Some say he's still wandering those trails. No one really knows. But I'll tell you this, every patrol that goes into Blue Hollow comes back different, if they come back at all. We spent the rest of the day inside the station, patched into a secure line with command. For nearly 3 hours, Mason delivered the most detailed, measured report of his career, walking them through the timeline, the escalating encounters, the warnings carved into trees, the rearranged gear, the laughter laced through our radio frequencies, the coordinated formations of small figures, the elder who accepted the challenge coin, and the barrier that opened only when we showed respect. Pole uploaded every photograph, the circles carved into the oak, the six-fingered symbols, the footprints with their delicate 5 toes, the cairns built from river stones no wither could have fed. The image that struck us hardest, the one command pretended not to react to, was the night vision shot of dozens of small figures surrounding our ridge position in a perfect arc. Turner submitted GPS logs, detailed measurements, and sketches of track patterns. I gave my own statement, every detail of the elder's voice, the drumming that made the ground shake, the sense that we had stepped into a rule set older than any map or treaty. Their response was exactly what we expected and hated anyway, skepticism. Psychological evaluation recommendations. Hypotheses about stress-induced collective misinterpretation, about local pranksters, about wildlife interference misremembered under exhaustion. A colonel we'd never met said extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and photographs could be misidentified or distorted by night optics. When Mason pointed out the intact gear maintained for 8 weeks after Miller's disappearance, the colonel dismissed it as evidence someone had been out there, not evidence of who or what. They blamed fatigue for the rearranged crates, dismissed the sorted ammunition as human tampering, and treated our overlapping testimonies as a possible case of shared suggestion. They chose the explanation that required the least imagination, contaminated groundwater causing hallucinations. A perfect excuse, one that could be filed away without investigation, and so they classified it. Blue Hollow became restricted territory, no military patrols without approval from levels so high, none of us had heard of them. Our reports vanished into a database we'd never see again. We signed documents with legal language sharp enough to draw blood. If we spoke out of turn, our careers, our freedom, maybe even our lives could be stripped away. They called it national security. We called it a cover-up. After that, everything fell apart quietly. Mason was moved to a desk job in Virginia, his field career buried alongside our report. Cool took early retirement. The radio static of that hollow burned too deeply into him. Turner disappeared into civilian work back in the Smokies, guiding hikers on trails far from Blue Hollow's shadow. Reed requested overseas reassignment, anywhere, without mountains, without forests, without silence thick enough to breathe. Dalton stayed in uniform, but stopped talking about the hollow entirely, as if silence itself was the offering the Watchers demanded of him. A year later, when I saw him during a training rotation, He just gave me a look, one that said the memory never left his bones. When my contract ended, I left the army. I built a normal life, or something close to it. But some nights, when wind pushes hard against my windows and the trees sway like they're whispering, I hear that soft rhythmic tapping again, the same cadence we heard in the dark, circling us like a question. And I remember the eyes reflecting our firelight, unblinking, judging, waiting. 5 years after the incident, I drove back to the edge of Blue Hollow. I didn't go in, I wouldn't dare, but I stood at the locked access gate, staring through the metal bars into the shadowed ridges beyond. Nothing looked unusual, nothing made a sound. The forest just watched. Then I saw it. A fresh cairn beside the gatepost, smooth stones stacked carefully, delicately. And sitting on top, gleaming in the late sun, was the challenge coin Mason had offered the elder. I didn't touch it. I didn't linger. Some boundaries aren't meant to be tested twice. The mountains remember. The watches remember. And they don't forget the men who crossed their line and lived. If you ever find yourself deep in the Appalachian backcountry, and the forest starts rearranging itself around you, if you see small footprints where no child walks, symbols carved into bark you don't recognize, gear shifted in patterns that feel purposeful, turn around. Don't push farther. Don't try to prove anything. Because if the young Weesoonsti decide you're not worth teaching, they'll stop being polite. And by then, the forest will have already made up its mind about you. If you made it this far, remember, some stories don't fade, and some places don't forgive. Blue Hollow still sits out there in the Appalachians, quiet as a held breath, waiting for the next set of footsteps foolish enough to cross its line. If you ever find yourself near those ridges, keep your eyes open, keep your voice down, and never ignore the signs. If you want more real military horror, more classified missions, and more stories the world was never meant to hear, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, and let me know where you're watching from. This is Captain Rebel, signing off. Stay sharp out there.